We've been teaching computers how to do math for a really long time. And then now we have finally taught computers how to read and write. Start in the opposite direction. Start with the customer first. If you don't have the customer, then don't do it. And things will just be a lot easier. There's 150 things that you have to learn to build like $1 billion company. 125 of them have to be learned by firsthand experience. And you only get that wherever you're doing it.
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I have a wonderful morning so far, and got my coffee going. So
here we go. Wait, here.
Yes,
Let's do cheers.
Virtual
Right.
cheers.
All right. You're repping with the GitHub.
I am. You know, man, this is like vintage. I don't know, vintage 2012 or something like that. So
Yeah.
I look at coffee cups for all the technology, that comes into my life, and I have a rather elaborate collection of coffee cups from various businesses, some of which do exist and some which don't. So
That's funny. This is vintage too. This is still almost 2 years old now. Like I don't, I can't give it away. Somebody put it on eBay.
That's right.
But no, it's funny from a merch perspective. I was thinking about it today. I've got stuff upstairs. I've got like Finn, from Intercom and like all these things that I've gotten from events. And so I've been trying to think through like what our sort of merch strategy is. And I've always thought what I want to do is not do volume, but do the quality. Like I have a couple of pieces from a couple of companies like that where I'm like, ooh, this is so soft. This is so not like this hoodie's so nice. Like, that you want to make people like actually want to wear it.
Yes. So I'll tell you a funny story about this. So the logo for Matey is meant to have, so it's meant to be sales. We're shifting that to actually be waves. So we'll come out with another logo in a few months, but it's meant to have basically a bit of a numerology around it, almost like the Mayans had with the way they did numbers. So like you could do like stars in one, or the moon on one side or the sun on one side with some stars or something, and like essentially develop a notion around like, okay, this is Q4. That must have been from Q4 of 2026. Or
oh, nice. Oh, I love that.
Embroider that on a hoodie, and then that's like what you give away at your event or at the offsite or whatever. So people
totally.
I've got
and
the
someone
vintage.
else sees it and it's like, oh, Q2. That's
Yes.
that's a keeper. I love that.
We've
well, I'm excited to talk to you today. Thanks for taking time. And I interesting our connection through Darwinian. I think really interesting with Andrew and Evan. I met Andrew through a mutual friend that we went through Blue Startups Accelerator together in Hawaii, and then Andrew I met and we're thick as thieves, and then we got to this place from a sales perspective where I basically, it's the old just founder-led sales, white knuckling it to a certain MRR place, but then you sort of go like, I could keep pushing in this direction. But if I want to keep, if I don't want to get ulcers and I want to sort of keep my sanity, and they came in and just like stood up our team, and now we're, oh my, literally like cranking.
Amazing.
When did y'all meet?
We met September of last year, and similar situation. And I was at this sort of like an executive, like a CEO dinner put on by Alumni Ventures, which is on our cap table, and they invest in our seed round. And so we are at this dinner, and basically they're like, hey, what does everyone need? Let's help each other out. I'm like, well, hey, we've stood up the sales team. We've got some things going. I'd love some feedback on whether or not I'm doing the right things. And, or is there any better ways we could do things? Am I missing the mark on something? Am I doing better than I think I am, or am I doing far worse? And it happens to be to Andrew. We've met at this point in the evening earlier, and really didn't know what he did or whatever. I just knew he was, there with the group, but he was sitting next to me, in fact. And so it turns out to be that they're like, oh, well, then you need to talk to Andrew. And so then Andrew and I talk, and it just sort of like, it snowballs. So we've been working together since September. Yeah.
It's such an interesting, and I think there's these chapters, and obviously this idea of zero to when I first started Stacklist, I love the book 0 to 1, but it's also one of those that I sort of sat around thinking like, what is one for me right now? Like
No,
I don't know. Is that for
great
a
question.
customer? Is that first like major round close? Um, but I feel like this was a chapter where I got right to that point, and I think I could just almost mentally see money spilling off the table because I couldn't keep up with every sort of like and then trying to develop the workflow, and do I get somebody sort of more junior and I'll train them up, and and so it's been a good process, but I'm glad we got connected through them.
For sure. Yeah. He's been extraordinarily helpful for us in terms of our developing out our pricing strategy, and
Hmm.
then in coaching the sales team, the SDR team, and so forth. Because we're essentially enterprise sales. At the end of the day, we're essentially enterprise sales, even though some of our customers are, a single person shop, a single person lawyer shop, but it feels like enterprise sale to them because it's a substantial percentage of their, what their monthly expenses are. So we might be about the cost of a rent payment for them, and hey, that's a big deal. Like if all of a sudden you're telling someone, yeah, one of your largest expenses, you're going to add one of those, but hey, you're going to make a bunch more money because you're going to be better, faster, whatever. That's great. But that's a hard conversation to have, or a hard decision to make. And, so how you structure that pricing is really important. And we had started off with, okay, cool. You can just like every time you want to use this, you can just pay for it. And it's a certain amount of money. And that's just like a recipe for them to be, decision like lethargy. And then making all these like, come in sometimes like here's 4 cases all of a sudden, and then you don't hear from them for like 8 months. And it's like, well, are they still popular or what?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, developing out the right intuition around the pricing stuff. I mean, I think we're in version 12 or 13. So it's been a very much an iterative process, but it's been great.
Pricing is such a learning thing when you first get started. You think I spent a couple days like really going with ChatGPT and coming up. I think we got some solid price. And it's like, okay, this is for version one of 83 that you start working through. It's interesting you mentioned that. I even think from my perspective, and I want to dive into your background and your history, but like from we're in such an interesting time with AI coming in, because you think about like people talking about, oh, like our Claude bill is like 1,000 a month, or whatever it is, which it seems high from a SaaS perspective because we're used to paying for intercom and post hog and all these other things. But then you go, wait a second, what would it be for a junior engineer and a fractional, controller and legal review, and then it's like, okay, well, 1,000 a month. This is pretty good.
It's a pretty
Yeah,
good
yeah,
deal. I think about it from like we have like a $10,000 a month cursor bill sometimes, and but we have 3 engineers instead of 8,
yeah,
and we have
yeah,
to
totally.
iterate more software with 3 engineers and a $10,000 cursor bill, which is by the way not even a full time engineer salary. And so with 3 engineers, and by the way, I'm one of the 3, so I have other things I do at the company too. And with that, 3 engineers and about $10,000 in cursor, then we now generate more software on a weekly basis than we did with like 7 or 8 engineers a year ago, on a monthly basis. So I mean, do the range of there's like that $10,000. I associate that $10,000 of spend with $150,000 of software engineering occurring, and
Totally.
so versus I won't name names, but like our database provider, and I'm like, that bill hits. I'm like, man, I have to do something about this. Like I have to
So
stop.
totally. Or I give you
What?
a good one is Slack. Is like I've been I was at a large design firm that was part of a huge consultancy, and we got to a point where it was like, oh, the Slack bill for the whole company is going to be 1 million a year or whatever it is, and those are the things where you're like, I got to get rid of that. But now it's so different to jump to a piece of software that's going to cost that much, but we haven't gotten to the place to correlate it yet to like what the operational and sort of labor cost would be, against that. Um, so I want to dive into like, so the idea, I think about Matey, and what I want to really get to at some point here is the week before you decide, okay, I'm gonna start this company. We're gonna dive into this. The day you buy a domain name, like all those kind of pieces. But before we get to that, I want to hear your background and history in terms of, kind of where you came from. Were there kind of things that in your upbringing or in family or things like that really you think maybe either contributed to this path or, entrepreneurship or, what that kind of history looked like?
Yeah, well, so great question there. I definitely always wanted to be an entrepreneur. Like as a kid, I was, much more interested in working for myself than working for anyone else. But then I had about like a 15-year career before I really started anything of consequence of my own. And that was just really developing skill set in the industry and so forth. But I did get at some point, I had like a 12-year software career. Count the few years before that, or discount the few years before that, just as like in my, in my bedroom. And, but my very first software that I wrote, I actually wrote, and it was like part of this like group, of folks. We would do competitions and whatnot. And I wrote some software for that. This is in the early 90s and sold it, to them on floppy disks and I still have a copy of 6 floppy disks from that. It was like Visual Basic,
Oh
and
my.
15, and so I was, selling that. So I was doing that very early on. Then got a software job, and then about I want to say like 10, 11 years later, I was super burned out on software,
Mm.
and so I had a bunch of my friends had moved to Austin, Texas, and gone to work for essentially a prop trading company, a day trading company, and they're making like 2 and 3 and 4 times as much money as I'm making. And they like get to work at 8 o'clock or 8:15. They leave. They're home in their apartment at 3:30 for sure. And then really frustrating is working late. You know what I mean? Like you might look at some stuff, but like you're better off to just go relax your brain by the swimming pool and like this is a way better life. Now, those lives don't really exist anymore outside of like certain realms. But I was like, okay, I'm moving to Austin. I'm joining this because like if you guys can trade, then I can learn how to trade. So, a few years go by, so I trade like through the financial crisis, and I did pretty well trading, just like basic trading, day trading through the financial crisis, and then ultimately it was like, hey, dude, I to myself, I'm like, I know how to write software, I know how to trade, so I should do quantitative trading. I should like write software to trade or at least help me out trade. So start off doing that. And so in 2006, 2007 timeframe, I'm building like sort of the basic underpinnings of quantitative trading, which at the time, like not a lot of people were doing, and a lot of infrastructure around it. And it was occurring, but like at Renaissance and at, Jane Street and a few others like that. And so then in just an office in Austin, Texas, then like a few of us were kind of like starting to play with this and ultimately built an entire trading desk at that shop. I ran that all the way through 2015, and then I was kind of going through some stuff in my personal life, and I was like, I just kind of want like a place to check out. So shut that down for a while. Went to work. I'd gotten a job offer at a quantitative firm here in Austin, Texas, and so went to work there. And then I was looking around. And I was like, man, I think this place is going to go under. Like, whenever they hired me, they said that our expenses are this, and like we make $1 million a year. I can see how much we make every day. We make $1 million a year less than that. So like, where's my bonus coming from? Like, this is a problem. And so I was there for like 16 or 18 months and was like, okay, I'm out. And I really at that point still kind of going through that or like the tail ends of that personal stuff. And like I wanted a remote job. It's like I don't have to go to a desk every day at the same location. I want to be able to like travel and do whatever. So I just took like a remote software job for a couple of years and then started, got a phone call from some folks I met there, and they're like, "Hey, you used to run a trading desk. Why don't we do all this together?" And so that essentially elicited the conversations around my second trading desk, which I ran through 2022. But my heart really wasn't in it the second time around, and it was a much better. I had a much better like intuition around what to do, and like it just like of course like just the market changed so much and like just things become much more commonplace. So the kinds of things that we had to learn from scratch are now NASDAQ is advertising to you. So it was, it was just, my heart wasn't in it anymore. It was no longer like a chase or a thrill. So I had in 2022, I took a phone call and I went to work for this startup as the director of machine learning, and it was going to be it was a crypto quantitative crypto thing. It wasn't trading; it was really selling an analysis, pardon me, of NFTs. But what came out of that was a very interesting. I think we actually did amazing work there, and we essentially did like a valuation strategy and solve the problem of illiquid. How do you value illiquid assets in a really novel way? I thought that was really great. But then that thing goes away. So then FTX happens in November of 22. Silicon Valley Bank in March or February of 23, and then there was no way that that was going to be crypto is no longer going to be a thing.
So, did you
And
go down the NFT rabbit hole?
I really didn't. I mean, to be
Yeah.
totally honest with you, like I was like, I can't believe this is happening. I thought that there'd be really cool use of that technology. You could do lots of fun things, which is what
Oh, and
drew.
I think it will. I think it was the underpinning, and I think it was the testing of the now. Because you think about it, Ethereum has now the throughput is just an unbelievable amount of money, and so and trading, and so I can definitely see the future of having immutable blockchain assets of your house or a contract or whatever it is. But I was in the like waking up at 2 a.m. to see if NBA Top Shot was like dropping, like LeBron packs and
Oh, yeah. Or I understand, I understand why it happened. I mean, we're all stuck in our house at COVID, and this is like a fun thing to do. And like you have all these people with you know, with some extra time on their hands, that this sort of gets like almost like gamble on this stuff. So I mean, it's not surprising that it happened, and
yeah,
but I was really disappointed from a technology perspective that the hash wasn't the hash of the image. That aside, I really feel like you should get a hash
yeah,
of what underneath it, but
totally.
still solve that problem. And then like title company can go away. This mean we can just do that on the blockchain or like automobiles or whatever. There's so many different things that can be done that I'm very excited about seeing in the future. But so that what happened there, that company essentially closes down. So it was funded through like an investment vehicle of Eric Schmidt from Google. And so they stopped funding any of their sort of incubation that was happening in the crypto space at that point. This was, I mean, we were burning so much money, and like, what are we doing here? So that got shut down in March ish of 23. And so myself and a couple of other folks there, one of which I had brought with me from my trading desk era. He worked for me on my quantitative team. And another fellow started Matey in March of 23. And Matey, the advent of that, or someone asked me about this last night. The advent of the name was that was the Wordle of the day, and we were looking for
That's
Wordle,
great.
something other than Copilot, because everyone was using Copilot, GitHub Copilot,
Hmm.
like all that, and we're like, okay, well, that's like a little at this point, it's just like overused. But I wanted something to describe what we wanted to build, which was like it was your first mate, it was your friend, something that was like essentially, I envisioned like R2D2 and C3PO, but in your pocket,
I love
and
it from a branding perspective. It's got not just like a co-pilot and also like collaborator partner. Like it's all got this very sort of like activity transactional piece to it. But maybe he's got such a different relationship trust kind of like there's this understanding that comes with it that's nice.
confidant.
Yeah,
It's like this is a trusted person that you can sort of like leave. Like you would expect to be able to put your first mate in charge of the ship and then go on shore. What happens is like the next in command, and so we think of this like as the next in command is and eventually, this matey is coming to you and saying, hey, these like I've been observing what's going on in whatever setting it is. Like legal mate is our first mate, and there are other mates that we envision in the future, but legal mate is the first mate. And so um first mate happens to be ironically our second mate that we're building. But this is the thing that essentially wakes, whenever you wake up in the morning to check it, and it's like, cool, I know all the Slack messages that came in while you were asleep or dinner. I see all the emails. the ones that did and did not come in. So not having an event is an event, and so forth. And these are the three things that typically I see you do whenever this happens. And the option is one of these three things, and you can hear. I've done the first draft. You can discard the two that you don't want. It's a who's your optionality for the day, and you get to just sort of like orchestrate your life as opposed to doing it and going and typing it. That's the vision of what we're building.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear about like how. So I love this period that we're in, and you and I have gone through these periods too. When you think about early or late, so late '90s. My first computer was the 8086 luggable compact that weighed like 60 pounds and had two 5 1/4 floppies. And so like I remember going through those periods. I bought my first domain name, which was zipzap.com, and I sent my first email and I ran downstairs and I was like, Mom, you'll never believe there's this thing. Like you can like send a message to someone in Japan and they can like read it and it's for free. But interesting through that like website period, people, websites start coming around, businesses realize they have to have websites and that sort of transformational period. I feel like we're back in that period, right? Where it was, what was it, Q4 of 24, late Q3 of 24 was the like ChatGPT, this blows our mind. Now it's sort of out in the zeitgeist. But you guys were what, 8 months, before that. What was as you started sort of doing this, what were the magic pieces when you started seeing, not just automations and workflows, but the actual ability to give and receive and almost partner with something like Matey?
Well, the realization for me, I guess the big unlock for me mentally is that we've been teaching computers how to do math for a really long time, since the beginning. The Babbage machine, the mechanical sort of way that we talk how to do math. And then now we have finally taught computers how to read and write. And so the reading comprehension actually, ChatGPT was this notion of writing, and I could like go ask it a question, it would write something for me. But I actually found it to be much more intriguing that it could read and then write. So, you provide it a corpus of data and say, hey, what about this? And to me, that was like the real unlock, because I was like, this is not just about everyone prompting these models to go generate new content that who has time to read. It's about consuming everything that as human beings, as a society, we really don't have the time to consume. And like one of the like whenever we were thinking about different types of companies to build, this was whenever Silicon Valley Bank was going under. And I was like, I eyeballs on the news that weekend, all weekend long. And I was like, man, I'm seeing all these conflicting reports about what things are happening. It'd be so great if I had a chat GPT that could just go read all those things and then like orchestrate the information and sort of give me some degree of confidence around it. And so that came out of that came like the original user experience designs. I just like drew on like my daughter's like art pad that weekend. We're like, this is
Nice.
what I want, and then like, well, what's a good data source to do this with? I mean, News was one, so Newsmate was envisioned, but then which we never built. But you know, having to be talking to a lawyer. In fact, months before, I had talked to a lawyer who's like telling me about ChatGPT, his experience with it. It was like, you got to build me some things. So then that sort of like we found legal more, or it found us more than we found it. And some other avenues just kind of opened up, and then we can tackle the whole discovery problem. With ChatGPT, this could actually be a great way to combat information warfare that happens in these cases and so on, and increase access to justice for everyone, or the justice system at large, because sometimes, who can sue Exxon whenever they're going to send you 14 more, and so on. But so my unlock was like, there's all of a sudden this like levels a playing field on consuming information, and if we do this correctly. But then I also, man, I think this happened probably like a year and a half later. I was pretty late to the party on using AI coding. It wasn't didn't use AI to help me code. I would just go put a question to ChatGPT, like their best models, and like say, okay, write me a function to do this, and like I would go tweak it and then put it in. But the December of last year really was the unlock, where I think it was Opus 4.5 or 4.6 had come out, and Cursor was like finally good enough to me to like really trust it and not have to go do more work after the fact, and it would have been done up front by me. And so but that's whatever I think the whole reasoning thing started to take shape. And we realized, okay, we can use these models for, we've been talking about using these models for like true inherent understanding and reasoning and planning and so orchestration for a while. Like this is actually now good enough to you really use, and this is at least as good as a software engineer I would hire.
Yeah,
And
I think 4.6 was that moment too where you just went like, oh, like it was very, I remember like when ChatGPT came out and that whole period between ChatGPT really starting to get in the vocabulary of people's, consciousness, and then from there to 4.6, prompt engineering and really structuring who are you, and all those pieces. And then 4.6 was like, I need some help with some stuff. And it's like, cool, I got this, and it just like is unbelievable that turn. And ever since then, I feel like it's been going just faster and faster. But where did y'all start with? You said a couple of people came on that you had worked with previous. When did y'all really start to come together and say like, this is a branding domain, it's us? Like, what was the kind of moment around there?
I think that was March or April of 23. And
Yeah.
you're got the domain name and the Slack and the G Suite, and then I had like, I knew that I was like, I'm not going to try to bootstrap this. I want to go raise money. So then
Mhm.
we spent that summer building product and trying to do a fundraise. Really terrible time for fundraise. A pre-seed round on a pre-revenue company, and I mean, despite the half,
Pre AI is in people's minds in the way
yeah,
that it was the next year, right? Which is even more difficult.
that's right. And then we did get it. We at the very sort of tail end of the summer of 23. I said to the guys, I was like, I don't want to do all these fundraising pitches. I want to go build product until we have something better to show everyone. And so let's just go focus on that. So then brought in another fellow, actually my brother, who like helped us build the front end, the user experience out, and he's the reason why the application is beautiful. Because the rest of us were not going to be able to do that, and it's just not our forte. And so then all of a sudden things started to click, and had a few customers and some things, and we got accepted to the Neo Accelerator, and then that just sort of like everything took off from there. So that was like through 2024. We go to the Neo Accelerator in that summer, and then did a seed round in November. But through like we signed in 24, we signed a deal with like the Colorado state government, so to be used for criminal defense on their what they call the alternate defense council. It's kind of a secondary public defender system that they have in some states. And so then things started to really flywheel at that point. And then but all along, we're building, there's a bunch of legacy players, and or three or four legacy players that matter. And we've been building product and building product and building products like from the ground up on an, AI native on the ground up. It's not like a vector database bolted on top of a pre
Hmm.
database engine, right? And so, and fundamentally, the reason why I was in tune with building in the legal space first, because I do think that this has like what we built has a much greater applicability in the long run for other use cases. But I was interested in the legal space because it has the least room for error on hallucinations, and it's like the most rigorous use case. In the future, I might actually not make that mistake. I'd rather build the easy problem and go get quick wins first in the future. But I tell people all the time, it's like there's 150 things that you have to learn to build like $1 billion company, and I have not built $1 billion company, so uh, caveat that there may be more than 150 things, and I may believe that I know some of these in the dump.
Yeah.
125 of them have to be learned, by firsthand experience, and you only get that wherever you're doing it. You can't read it in the book.
Duh. It's not a workshop. It's not a course you download. Like you gotta you gotta feel the pain of it, and then you gotta go like, oh, that's not it. That's not it.
Yes,
Uh,
exactly. So, but yeah, we did start with the hardest problem first, which is like, how do we build a system that can access at the time gigabytes of information, because context windows were 4,000 characters or 4,000 tokens. So how do you build something that access a gigabyte of data without hallucinating? And we build that system out. Now it's a petabyte of data, and now it's so much richer in terms of how it can like reason through finding answers to questions. But throughout this entire process, that's what we're building, is this like AI native version of like what these other tools in the legacy industry has made over the years. And all of those tools, they use all this other kind of, it's called tar or cal. And it's like not terribly important to get into them, but it's like, the way I describe it is that those things exist because language models didn't exist. And if we had had language models whenever those things were built, we would have never developed them. And so that we fundamentally know that that needs to go away, and that this is the future. And so, from the ground up, let's build this like native system that can be used in the courtroom to address the very real problem that we have. And if we can trust it in the courtroom, then we can trust it through the rest of our lives. Ultimately, I want to executive mate is essentially where I'd like for this to be. I'd like this is an AI that can run a company, starting with the legal department and the accounting department. And, plenty of people are doing the sales stuff, but like if you can control those three things, you can run an entire company with a system like this. But you can't do that if you can't trust it. And so that's why we like to say, we're essentially we are building and selling trust at scale
Nice.
with AI.
Yeah, that's amazing. What was the progression after? So, when y'all started to post accelerator, things started to sort of click. Like, where did it go from, the small team to then starting to scale to a larger team?
Well, so we did a pretty sizable seed round in November of 24. And I'd kind of always believed we'd need a certain amount of money to get to Series A, which is true. And we raised a substantial portion of that in November. So we're about to do another fundraise and get the rest of that. But I wanted to like constrain it as much as possible to keep it lean and like, create some like intensity and urgency and pressure. But then not have it be so hard that it's just like, four people in a room trying to get it done. So we after that seed round in November 24, we started to develop out the team. And it was funny because initially I was trying to build out the sales team and like hired two or three I hired two different people that I literally gave an offer letter to be the VP of sales, like come in and run sales from the ground up. Everyone's like super excited about it. They're like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. I've been selling in the industry for a long time. I wish I'd been selling this 20 years ago. And then they're like, oh, but by the way, I have this like non-compete. That might be a problem. I'm like,
Oh,
you could have
oh
known
no.
better. Um,
Yeah.
and they're like, oh, you should talk to this other fellow that is my protege. And so then I talked to the other fellow. And then I'm like, okay, this is exciting. This is even more exciting because, this guy really gets it even better. But then same things like, and I'm like upfront, I'm like, hey, by the way, the guy that referred you has a non-compete. So I want to make sure that's not going to be a problem here because otherwise we can look in a different direction. So after all those things, I finally wind up hiring someone else and to do the sales, and it also didn't work out. I would end. So that was the progression of the sales process. And subsequently, at the time, we're actually bringing out the engineering department and building an engineering team. So we ultimately, I think, I made some substantial miscalculations on that, which was that our problem space existed in a given area, but it really existed in another area. So what we had to solve first is how do you ingest all this unstructured data? And I thought what we were solving was sort of like the AI agent problem. So we built this amazing AI agent, but then it's like, well, we've got to feed it with context and getting all of that out of things like body worn camera footage or surveillance footage or, recordings of phone calls, all those sorts of things becomes like a petabyte scale problem very quickly. And that ultimately consumed a substantial amount of engineering effort just to make that system work at scale reliably. Because it needs to be lights off. If you got to touch every case that comes to the system, then that's just not scalable. But it was really, through that process, we're like simultaneously, we're selling customers, selling customers. And then some of them, honestly, like I apologize to them because like the product really, we weren't ready for your 4 terabyte data,
Right.
particular format. And there's a bit of like a Zeno's paradox on new data that comes into the system, where it's like, well, have we seen that kind of data before? I don't know. We don't know until we try it, you know. And so you just approach zero in terms of issues and or feature gaps that you have on data ingestion, but essentially it becomes a data ingestion problem. And then the rest of it is actually was fairly straightforward to us because come from like a trading background where you deal with petabytes of data in like 2015, well before it was easy to do it. But I would say that's like what our sort of scale up looked like. Um, to do it over again, I know I'd probably spend more time building product. There's a slightly different area we could have leaned into. This whole time we're building this product space out, it's like you need it to be a foot long on the ruler, and we're sort of like at 8 inches or 9 inches of what we've built. So now we have achieved at this point in the product enough critical mass of features that we can target the civil space. We've been previously targeting the criminal defense space, and because they're very underserved, but and then they have no money and get way more data than the civil market. So the civil market is already paying like 10 and 20 times sometimes what the criminal folks could afford to pay, and the data requirements are just minimal in comparison. And I probably should have focused more on that, built out more of the product for them, which is really user experience and like basic database engine stuff. Should have spent more energy on that, less energy on importing data from criminal defense folks. But that's what I would do differently. But who knows?
What did you go through periods where you needed to do human running, human in the middle, 80%, 20%, and then sort of start to change the percentages as you went? And like what areas and how did you sort of navigate that?
Um, it was really kind of a natural progression. We sort of did this with as the models got better. So as the models got better at orchestrating, we could take more and more things out of the loop. So the human didn't, initially the human's like doing the first 30%, last 30%. And so you're doing the 40 in the middle. And then like sort of that expands in both directions. So, and the way that expands in both directions, for example, is that, the human kind of primes things up and it's like, this is what I'm looking for. Like, the prompt that it has to give to the system, has to be of a degree of sophistication. And then, okay, we've got what we need here. And then at the end, it's like, okay, what do I want to do with all this data? And you had to be very specific about it. But as the models got better, and as we learned what people were doing, like we can take a much simpler prompt that's much more ambiguous and then understand how to navigate going in, like essentially bootstrapping that prompt for the user. Maybe ask a question if necessary, but like bootstrap that into something that the actual underlying agent's going to resolve. And then at the end of this process, it could say, oh, I've observed, by the way, that you typically want to write a Word document now. So do you want me to save this for you as a Word document and that sort of thing? Or would you like this in some other fashion that you can consume or pass along? So those are the, just sort of creeps in, gradually where maybe now the users are doing the first 15%, the last 15%. So eventually, sort of you want that to be almost as close to zero as possible, where the data came in, we have an idea of what the user is going to prompt. So then we go do 2 or 3 of those for them. And then we have observed what they would have normally done. Instead of giving them the question, do you want a Word document or do you want a PDF? We just make both, let them throw
Right.
one, etc. That's where I think things go. But all of that
Well,
is bootstrapped in my view, or it surfs the wave of what the model orchestration engines are capable of doing. So those the real frontier models are where that sort of magic lives, which is what gets exciting about new models that come out.
oh, I'm so disappointed Fable went away. I only got 4 days of Fable, 3 days of Fable, and and then it was like, oh nope, you can't have that anymore. Oh, where do you see like where do you see like what's so you're prepping for a fundraiser now, right? What's the that's towards Q4, right? Yeah. What is obviously the lead up to this is heads down living in a hotel room. You know, focus on the fundraise, but like what is the fundraise sort of focused on post fundraise, and what does that sprint look like for next year?
That's almost 100% go to market. I feel
Mm.
very comfortable where the product is. There's like, yes, there's like, I'd like an SRE. Yes, I'd like another engineer too. It's like really, really leverage all of the infra that has been developed and like tuned and hardened over the past couple of years. But it's essentially go to market. It is now, and as we and the same thing, that we're doing essentially now, but with more people. Because leading up to the fundraise, like everyone is essentially investing in, they're buying alpha, and the proxy that they're using for that is revenue. So, um, that's and then the curve on the revenue, like how quickly you got to it, right? And we really just started official go to market, even though we signed that first contract with the state government, our very first contract with the state government, Colorado, in September of 24. It wasn't like, hey, this is like a $10 million a year contract. It was like, we're going to use you on the cases that we want to use you. And so, but hey, that's a win, right? Now we've transitioned more into the, like, okay, you buy a certain like package, and this is as we were talking earlier, the pricing discussions were on version 13, the price. And that's because it's probably version 18 because we didn't really count it on the first 5 with 10 iterations. But it's really about tuning that into like the civil space. We really understand how to sell it to the criminal defense market. But like I said, the civil markets where like 20 and 50 times as much money exists, and like you have all these legacy players that kind of everyone hates using, honestly, but they just have to keep using it. And it's really about, we've got, I don't know, 8 or 10 logos in that arena, and we go in there and we sell them on like a tiny contract, but the land and expand is huge. But I'm like, I don't want a big contract because then it's going to take them 6 months to sign it. I want a
All right.
3K apartment that they'll sign like in the next 2 weeks, because then we'll get them in the system. We'll be collecting revenue, getting feedback, and then they'll be at 50K compartment at 50 grand a month or something before you know it. So it's really about keeping that curve going. If we can acquire 2 to 4 logos a month over the next 6 months, then that'd be great. And then by the end of the year, like everything just starts to kind of magically click. You'll see those sorts of hockey sticks happen on the individual contracts, as just word spreads virally within the organizations. That's really the focus. And then essentially once we do the next round, I want like to quadruple the size of the go-to-market team, maybe get some marketing, maybe get some paid digital back in place. Now that we can service like a different segment of the market and so forth. That's really that's what the use of funds will be. At least 50%, if not 80% of it. So that's the
And
plan.
this is what round is you're raising A, is that right?
I would not call this an A. I'd call
Uh,
this like seed, like the remainder of our seed. So like whenever we,
okay.
like I mentioned earlier, whenever we started off, there was like, I think I might need about X number of dollars. We raised 7.5, and
Right.
that was maybe about 65% of that.
Seed
So
two.
seed two,
Um, yeah.
I don't know what we call these
Rounds
things.
are so squishy these days, right? It's all, and in my play, sort of we did an angel, friends and family, we had some strategic investors, but people go, oh, are you going to do a pre-seed? Are you going to do a seed? It's sort of like, I don't, I don't, you got pre-seeds that are raising like, 10 million, you got seeds that are raising them. It seems to be all over the place. So, I don't know. Uh,
Like $5 million, $15 million on however much revenue, like a series A, but then like I've seen seed rounds at $15 million.
yeah, yeah, totally. Right.
I think it really
What's
just
this?
depends.
So I feel like we're in this place where I feel like historically people would say, where do you see yourself and where do you see the company in 5 years or 10 years? I feel like now we're in this place where if I said 5 years or 10 years, it would be like the Jetsons and spaceships and all sorts of stuff. So with how fast everything's going, but like, so what would you see yourself in the sort of you've just raised A, like the next round beyond you've raised A, and where is that trajectory take you once you've sort of lily pad past this next round?
Well, I think it's product, and it's product focus. And so the essentially where I really want to lean into is right now we are collecting the data. Like whenever you're in a litigation, you use Matey because you've got a bunch of discovery data, or you're going to produce a bunch of discovery data to opposing counsel, and so we're the data layer of all that, right? And what the next generation of the product comes, in my view, is where it starts to this it's what we call first mate, and first mate is that um, your trusted companion that beforehand knows exactly what you want, and or the optionality of what you would want potentially, and so it goes and just does those things and becomes like, I think of us, I hate to use phrases like this, but like the cursor of discovery, or the cursor of
Hmm.
is kind of where I want to go. Um, there's a lot of ducks feet under the water about all of that. Like really the fundamental architecture of what we're building now is in service of being able to do that in the future. And you can't just like scale up Mongo database forever. You know, this has to be done in a fundamentally different way. And so that's what we're building. And so you'll see a lot of that as the go-to-market engine is as we ramp that go-to-market engine, you'll see a bunch of that happening underneath the covers. If you were to peek underneath the covers of the engineering, and like what that product, the architecture roadmap looks like, because it's all in service of essentially every lawyer in America essentially just putting everything they able to do inside of Maybe, you know. Uh, and so much to say about that. And then ultimately, there's a vision even beyond that that I don't like to publicize just yet, but we're going somewhere. Let me say it this way: like what I want to build is essentially it creates a market that currently doesn't exist, and fundamentally, and we're able to do this because of AI. But fundamentally, this marketplace does not exist, or this market does not exist, and it doesn't exist as a function of the ethical constraints of the legal industry. So essentially, like do an end run around that fact to provide net asset value of law to law firms and that sort of thing. So it's a really exciting trajectory that I foresee by the end of next year, so 18 months from now, would be um, would be what we're essentially starting to go to market with. So that would be sort of like a post Series A for us, I want to say. And the vision there is essentially that, like much like we talked about earlier, where we have a $10,000 or $12,000 cursor bill, and I associate that with value. Okay, so my line item on my income or expense sheet, it says cursor, and I'm like, okay, I associate that with positive value, even though it's an expense. I
Hmm.
That's made to be for a law firm. I
Okay.
associate with a positive. And I also associate that with an asset on my balance sheet, in the same way that you have a cursor bill and you know that you generated a bunch of software. That is what that's essentially where we're going. So I'm teasing all this out. That there's a specific product we're building for that.
Amazing. Um, that's so exciting, and it's funny now that even having a moonshot and having this sort of big vision, the long term vision. I think when you say, Google starting here and thinking, oh, this is going to be the index of the internet, such a sort of like extreme future vision of how the world could look. But what's interesting now is that you can actually start to connect all the dots, and you get so much feedback now so early that you can see that vision, because it's become so much clearer even, now month over year. I would think it's more year over year, quarter over quarter. Now it feels like month over month it's changing and heading. You can see that direction so
That's
much
exactly
clearer.
right. Yeah, and it's
Um,
so nice that you have the companies like Google and Meta and so forth to give us that gives you the clues as to what it takes, to go from point A to point B, and like what are the fundamental ingredients that are needed. Of course, a lot of that changes with respect to AI is a bit different than social media, pardon me, or indexing the internet. Um, but the fundamentals are the same, in terms of what you're really trying to capture, and like and what you're using to lead the product development. I think so. It's been a very fascinating time we live in.
Oh, I love it. I'm like a kid in a candy store. It is back to like my CSS3 HTML book and writing the first website and putting it live and be like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I feel like we're back in that time. Um, so what would you give, like, if you went back to the early entrepreneurial version of yourself? What would you do anything different, or would you sort of give advice to the people that are in that place right now where they're thinking about like sort of setting out on their own journey and I think I'm built for something different. Like, what advice would you give those people that are thinking about from an entrepreneurial kind of
Uh,
setting
I,
off in that direction?
I have a few things I would say. Number one, if I were talking to my 15-year-old self, I'd say, okay, keep going. Um, Solve the easy problem first, not the hard problem first. That's and then a very interesting thing that I was taught in through the Neo program I'll share. And this was a massive unlock for me. Think about Google, or, you start Google, and this is how all of those sorts of businesses from the 90s to 2000s began, where, hey, we have this like really awesome technology. What can we use it for? So you start off with this awesome technology, and then let's just give it away for free because like Venture will give you the money to do so. Now you're trying to collect eyeballs and whatnot. And then, some subset of those things work. And then you ultimately wind up having a monetization scheme. And then you ultimately get money for it, and then you sort of like capture the market. So you go from like, here's an implementation of a thing. We figure out like, to what problem is the solution, and then we figure out who will pay for that. And it really today goes in the opposite direction. So start with the customer first. Who's paying for it? What problem do they have that they're willing to spend money solving? Like, what is a solution to that problem that they'll pay for and would, provide some sort of like excess value to the customer and to yourself, and then go implement it. And the implementation is now trivial because of things like Cursor and Codex and so forth, right? And lots to be said about all that, but just like start in the opposite direction. Start with the customer first. If you don't have the customer, then don't do it. And things will just be a lot easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Amazing. Well, it's just so much fun. I appreciate you coming on. I love hearing the story of, it's my favorite thing to hear the spark of inspiration. The team comes together, everybody sort of jumps into Slack, gets emails, and goes like, all right, what do you want to do next? And then, but especially where you're at, seeing that sort of, finishing up the seed round, thinking about and and being at the point of your journey, it's so exciting, and I appreciate you sharing all of it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. It was wonderful meeting you. And yeah, we'll love to chat with you again sometime.